Okay, so this is now, I guess, the first session of week 2. I don't remember where, I don't remember where I left off. Um, Whatever, I'm just gonna start on this page. Um, Zena sat down on the porch railing across from my chair, watching me with that slight smile. One hand on a brown thigh. The men stood less comfortably at the top of the steps. They seemed to be expecting me to do something. I can't lie out in the sun, I said. I always burn. It's because you're a redhead, said Joe, with a hollow little click of teeth. Seems like an inappropriate place for your family to come for a vacation in that case, Zena said sympathetically, not thoughtful of you. Mom has friends who come here, and I have a lot to read, I said, feeling pitiful. What would they think of someone who spent his vacation reading? I felt a blush coming on. What are you reading? Manny inquired. I held the book in front of my face. I love science fiction, he said, clasping his hands together fervently. But I haven't read that volume. What's it about? It's about these aliens that invade the Earth, I said. These sort of slug-like things, like exposed brains that attach themselves to people's backs and control them. How loathsome. Zena said and turned down the corners of her mouth. Not to mention biologically naive, Joe said, chuckling. There's no way an organism like that could evolve naturally. Why not? I said, wanting to defend my taste in literature. Nobody knows what conditions might be like on other planets. Anything could be possible, couldn't it? Joe stroked his mustache. I think it sounds enchanting, Manny said. I love creepy stories like that. It reminds me of our game. Can I borrow the book when you're through? Sure, I said. When would you guys like to go on one of those excursions? Speaking of creepy stories, Zena firmly interrupted me. We were all entertained by the story you told us last night about this house. You made us rather intrigued. Would you disapprove if we had a peek inside? Just so we could see just so we could see where it really happened? I guess not, I said. Something about her request didn't ring true. It wasn't what I had said that had kindled their interest. They had wanted to look inside the house yesterday, the moment they had arrived, before I told them the story about it. I remembered what Ted had said about the reaction when they couldn't rent the house themselves. As I held the door open for them, I had a particular sensation that I was making a mistake, but I dismissed it immediately. I wanted to play the authority and show them around. Gee, it's so much more comfortable than our place, Manny said, his eyes wandering over the wood paneling, as though the person who built it actually planned to reside here. But it's so dark, Zena said. She looked out the dining room windows, and you can't even see the water. Our monstrosity next door gets in the way. He was right when he said the cottage had a better view, Joe said, peering inside the fireplace. Look at this, Manny called from the kitchen. You could actually cook in here. The rest of us trooped in after him. Do you three have some kind of special interest in old houses? I asked. Sure, Barney, Zena said, peering into the cabinet under the sink. Joe was opening and shutting the cupboards of Manny, and Manny was poking around in the refrigerator. The thing is twice as great as ours, he said. Can you believe this? Frozen scrambled eggs substitute margarine. He sounded shocked. Dad has to watch his cholesterol, I explained. Hey, listen, there's some really famous old houses over in Dunstable, kind of museums. Maybe we could go see them sometime. Sure, Barney, Zena said, exploring the broom closet. Manny was going through the drawers of cooking utensils. Look at all the tools that are included with this place. Much more than they provide for the cottage, he said. Were they actually looking for something or just making jealous comparisons between our house and theirs? I was beginning to find their behavior a little annoying. You wanted this place, didn't you? I said bluntly. What do you mean? Selena turned around and stared at me. That's what Ted said. You wanted this house, not the cottage. Well, you have to admit, it is nicer, Manny explained reasonably. Yes, but since you hadn't seen it, how did you know? And what are you looking for now? Perceptive, aren't you, Barney? Joe said, but it didn't sound like a compliment. You're astute. We do have an interest in old houses. It's kind of a hobby, a harmless one, like our game. You don't have any objection to our looking around, do you? Uh, no, no, I guess not, I said, feeling foolish. Well, if you'd stop asking questions and let us get on with it, then perhaps we'd have time later to teach you our game. Just drop over after lunch. Sound fair enough? Sure, that would be great. Agreed. He pulled open the basement door. Where's the light? On the left. There wasn't much to see down there. Just a few pieces of the usual basement junk and a lot of pipes, but the three of them behaved as though they had discovered an Egyptian crypt that had been sealed up for the last 5,000 years. They ran around exclaiming and poking through the moldy debris. Did they really expect to find something valuable? Watching them made me feel a little edgy. But I didn't have the nerve to ask them to stop, so I went back upstairs and waited in the living room. I began to wonder what would happen if Mom and Dad returned and found them in the house. It had been well over an hour since I had left the beach. Our three neighbors almost didn't notice me on their way through the living room to the stairway to the second floor. Only after I coughed did Manny say, "Oh, is it agreeable if we go upstairs?" But he didn't even slow down. Then Zena turned back from the landing abruptly as though she had just remembered something and said, "Would you like us to show us your room, Barney?" I trotted after them, remembering that the bed wasn't made and hoping I hadn't left any dirty underwear lying around. I needn't have worried, though. They did. They did Mom and Dad's room before mine. Most people just stand politely in the doorway to a bedroom and peer inside. But not these three. They made a thorough search, poking into the closet and under the bed, examining the windows, opening the dresser drawers. It didn't make any sense. My room is the one with historical interest. Still, it gave me a chance to dash ahead of them and clean up. When they finally did reach my room, they didn't bother making even a token attempt to pay attention to me. It was I who waited politely in the doorway, sensing that it was important to keep out of their way. The banter stopped, their faces hardened and withdrew. More like archaeologists than ever, they examined the paneling and the windows in minutest detail, unblinking, their fingers stroking the wood with the relevant intensity of the blind. In the silence, I became aware of the surf and the bird cries and listened to the static beat of a radio rise and fall in volume as some kids carried it part way up the road and then turned back. I felt shut out and restless, but I was afraid to make, make, make a sound. What frequency was that? Okay. I felt shut out and restless, but I was afraid to make a sound. I began to wonder how I was ever going to get rid of them. Almost 2 hours now had gone by since I had left Mom and Dad at the beach. I knew they weren't going to let themselves burn, and it was also lunchtime. Surreptitiously, surreptitiously, I crept into the room and looked over their shoulders out the window. The view from upstairs was not obstructed by the one-story cottage next door. The ocean air was so clear that even though Mom and Dad were about 100 yards away, I could easily read Mom's expression as they passed the kids with the radio. Hang on a second, I need to take a drink of water. I could easily read Mom's expression as they passed. Yeah, what was it? As they passed the kids with the radio, she wondered why. She wondered why they were coming down our dead-end road, and she probably wouldn't like it if she knew how thoroughly the people from next door had gone through her belongings. She might think they were casing the place to see if there's anything to steal, and maybe she would be right. What else could they be doing? And if they did end up stealing anything, it would be my fault. There was no time to stand around berating myself. Even if the neighbors were perfectly innocent, I still didn't want Mom to find them in the house. But they hadn't even noticed Mom and Dad. They were behaving like zombies. Listen, those are my parents coming back. I faltered, twisting my hands, see? They started like people coming out of a trance and froze for a moment. Then they just turned slowly to look at me, their faces still dead. They might not understand what you're doing in our house, I went on. I think maybe you should go now. It was as though they did not know who or what I was, as though they really couldn't see or even hear me. Their icy, unresponsive stares cut me off like a solid wall. I never felt so supremely unnecessary, but they were the ones who were acting like crazy people, not me. What was the matter with them? Wasn't there anything I could say to get them to respond? I'm not kidding, I said. It could be embarrassing, and then I might not be able to ask you back to see this house again. They woke up like a freeze frame, melting back into action. Joe shook his head irritably and glanced out the window. Manny ran a hand through his hair. Zeta frowned and moved toward me. Don't worry, Barney, she said. We won't get you in trouble. Suddenly they were moving fast. Before I knew it, I was running after them into the kitchen. Thanks for the tour, Barney, Zena said, and I think you're accurate about your parents. It might be well if they didn't know we'd been here. Could I come over after lunch like you said? I asked before agreeing to keep their visit a secret. Sure, Barney, come on over. We'll do something fun. Perhaps play a round of the game, Zena said, pulling open the back door. Yes, come for a visit, Manny echoed as though he meant it, and they were gone. They managed to get across the yard and back to their cottage without Mom and Dad noticing a thing. It was a small thing, their ability to get around without attracting attention, but it had the adeptness of a skill acquired with practice. It was the same as the way they had so thoroughly searched the house, working efficiently. Another acquired skill. As I went over it in my mind, I began to realize that they really hadn't missed a single cupboard or closet. Yet it was hard to believe. Yet it was hard. It was hard to believe they were thieves. And that was the case. If that was the case, they were too good to waste time at a dump like this, where there was obviously nothing of much value and only one family to steal from. Thieves with their apparent expertise would be working large and expensive resorts where the booty would be worth something. But if they weren't thieves, then what were they? From the dining room window, I watched the neighbors greet Mom and Dad from their front patio, where they were already relaxing by the time Mom and Dad reached it. They spoke pleasantly together until the neighbors got up and went inside. So impressive, that deep sense of commitment, don't you think, Mom was saying as they came into the house. But they're such cheerful young men, not at all stuffy. I'll bet they're doctors, that's why they give that impression of social responsibility. Not just the men, Dad said. The girls seem so involved in the problem of poverty, so deeply concerned, but charming at the same time. I'll bet she's a doctor, too. Probably a social worker. She doesn't seem as bright as the men. I was amazed. Mom and Dad weren't stupid, yet their impression of the neighbors was totally out of whack. Responsibility, concern with poverty. I wanted to scream with laughter, but I kept quiet. I would take advantage of the neighbors' invitation and visit them this afternoon, but this time I would turn the tables. I would be the one to find out about them. But when I went over an hour or so later, there was no answer to my knock. The house was empty and unlocked. For a moment I felt hurt that they had forgotten their invitation and gone off without me. Then I saw I was being silly. They had provided me with exactly the opportunity I wanted. I felt a prickling of excitement. I hadn't expected the situation to be reversed quite this neatly. It was like some funny game of taking turns and I barely hesitated on the threshold. And now I wonder how differently would things have ended if I hadn't found what I did that day. In the bright sunlight, their cheap little cottage was about as sinister as a dairy bar, which was actually what it looked like from the outside. The inside, with its linoleums and plastic furniture and picture windows, was equally eerie. If the place really had been dark and mysterious, I probably wouldn't have had the nerve to speak inside at all. As it was, the fact that I was secretly entering someone else's place to try to search out information about them was exciting enough. And I didn't even have to feel guilty. They were the ones who had started it, after all. They were only getting what they deserved. There was not much to poke into in the barren living room. A chartreuse plastic easy chair squatted on one side of the fireplace, a maroon on the other side, and facing it, a pink painted wicker love seat beginning to unravel. The square wooden dining table with captain's chairs around it was placed beside the largest window overlooking the water. The board game. The board game was no longer on the table or anywhere else to be found. I was disappointed. I had been looking forward to examining it. I leafed quickly through the books and periodicals on the mantel and tabletop, collections of horror stories. The Sunday New York Times, People magazine, some lurid mysteries, a large illustrated paperback about windsurfing. Nothing to learn there. The kitchen was smaller and more primitive than ours, the haphazard collection of plates and cups arranged on open pine shelving, the meager assortment of pots and pans under the sink. I didn't go through it very thoroughly. Whoever kept anything important in the kitchen, if anything was to be found, it would have to be in one of the bedrooms. I pushed open the flimsy door to the bedroom beside the kitchen. In the darkness, a deformed face swam toward me, all huge, bulbous forehead, with tiny squashed together eyes and two pursed, fish-like mouths hanging from the non-existent chin. I hardly shrieked much at all, and quickly complimented myself on how cool I was to realize, without even bolting from the house, that it was merely a warped mirror on the opposite wall. But I turned on the light immediately. There was a sagging double bed, a narrow closet, and a small dresser. Nothing to be found but men's clothes and a very large assortment of toiletries. Each of them had a separate bedroom. I learned that much. I came to Zeta's last, the lingerie, most of it with delicate lace embroidery. I found particularly interesting. It smelled like Zena's perfume, and if I hadn't taken the time to go through carefully, I would have never found the photocopied sheets, paper clipped together, pushed off into the bottom corner of the drawer. I'm going to stop there for today because it's been 17 minutes. This is probably, we were averaging, like a minimum of 230, 240 hertz and, pushing higher into the range. So it's also a little more challenging to maintain that pitch profile. At any rate, that's it for this recording.